Hi there, it's Matt here, and welcome back to the podcast. Now, there's a difficult truth for most people, which is that they have probably been taking melatonin in entirely the wrong way and for the wrong assumed reason. Not wrong in a disastrous sky is falling way, but wrong in a subtler sense. You've been asking it to do a job it was never hired to perform, nor has the skill to accomplish. Melatonin is not your brain's sleeping pill. It's your brain's clock whisperer, a nightly messenger telling your system when night has begun far more than how intensely to sleep. In this episode, I want to tell you the full story of that whisper, where melatonin comes from, what it can and cannot do for insomnia, when it really shines for jet lag, circadian rhythm disorders, and shift workers, and what we're starting to learn about its long-term safety, including that worrying sounding but more nuanced recent social media frenzy about the risk of heart failure in long-term melatonin users. Let's start inside your skull. Deep in the brain sits a tiny pea-sized structure called the pineal gland. For a long time, it was the anatomical equivalent of a locked room with no label. Then researchers discovered that when darkness falls, this gland begins secreting a hormone, melatonin, into the bloodstream. And as morning light returns, the secretion falls away again. Melatonin, in other words, is the body's internal sunset announcement. It doesn't slam you into unconsciousness. It steps onto the stage in the evening and says to every cell, it is biological night. Power down, begin the transition to sleep. In circadian biology, we call melatonin a chronobiotic. That's just a fancy term for a substance that can shift the timing of your internal body clock. If sleep is surfing, melatonin is not the wave and not the surfboard. It's the tide chart telling you when the swell is likely to arrive. Take melatonin at the right time and you paddle into position ahead of the wave. Take it at the wrong time and you're paddling in the wrong direction, wondering why nothing is happening. There are really two melatonins in this story. One is endogenous. That's what your brain makes naturally when darkness falls. The other is exogenous. That's what you buy in a bottle at the pharmacy. Your own melatonin rises when light levels drop, peaks in the biological night, then falls as morning approaches. The pill version is our attempt to hijack that system with a simple swallow. But the success of that hijack depends exquisitely on two variables: how much you take and when you take it. Most people first encounter melatonin as a supposed cure for insomnia. So let's go there. Chronic insomnia is not just, I'm a bit tired. It's difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking too early, at least 3 nights a week for months, with real daytime impairment. Professional sleep medicine guidelines looking at all the pharmacologic treatments for chronic insomnia in adults are pretty clear. Melatonin is not their star player when they line up medications and behavioral treatments for chronic insomnia. Melatonin is the one politely asked to stay on the bench. It produces only modest average benefits compared with other drugs, and nowhere near the benefits of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI, which is the current gold standard. When researchers pooled the clinical trials of melatonin for primary sleep disorders, that is, disorders where insomnia is not merely a symptom, they found that melatonin does, on average, shorten the time it takes to fall asleep, increase total sleep time a little, and improve subjective sleep quality. But the size of those changes is small. We are talking about shaving minutes off your sleep onset time, not transforming your nights. Melatonin in this setting is like loosening the parking brake rather than installing a new engine. the car rolls a little more easily, but it doesn't become a sports car.
A partner of today's podcast is Caraway. Now, we are well into the new year, which means that most New Year's resolutions have probably quietly fallen by the wayside. But my promise to cook more at home remains alive, and that is in no small measure due to my Caraway cookware. Now, I've mentioned it before. I study the neuroscience of sleep, which I think is probably one of the most complex biological systems that we know. Yet somehow, I cannot cook an egg without creating a carbon-based archaeological artifact. It's terrible. My relationship with cookware previously has been apply heat, forget about it, hear smoke alarm, and then apologize to my wife. But Caraway's ceramic coating is so naturally non-stick that I cannot burn a single thing. It's remarkable. Eggs slide off rather than welding themselves permanently to the pan, and cleanup takes just 90 seconds because of that non-stick material. Just add warm water, rinse, and you're done. Also, the non-toxic ceramic coating matters a great deal to me. It is third-party tested and it has no forever chemicals. That really is essential. I should also note that there are over 100,000 people who've given Caraway 5-star ratings, so I'm not the only one to be raving about them. They've also released a new kitchen timer and an expanded Bakeware Plus collection. All of that makes me look, because I now have it replete in my kitchen, as though I've seriously got my kitchen skills together. It's desperately misleading, but it is so appreciated. So if you buy the cookware set, it will save you up to $190 versus buying it all individually. That's what I ended up going for. And you can get a discount. So if you visit carawayhome.com/Matt Walker, you will get an additional 10% off, even an additional 10% off above and beyond the $190 that you save. So again, that is carawayhome.com/Matt Walker. Or if you're at checkout, just use the code Matt Walker, all one word, and you will get your discount. So that's Caraway non-toxic kitchenware made modern.
Recently, though, the story has gained a fascinating twist. A group of researchers in Italy asked a deceptively simple question. If we look across decades of trials, what is the best dose and timing of melatonin to help people fall asleep? They assembled 26 randomized control trials covering just under 1,700 observations from both people with insomnia and healthy sleepers. They then modeled how the effect of melatonin changes as you alter the dose, and crucially, how far in advance of bedtime you take it. Two key things jumped out of their analysis. First, dose. As they increased the dose, the sleep-promoting effect increased, but only up to a point. The curve reached a peak around 4 milligrams per day. Beyond that, gains flattened out. Push it higher, and you don't necessarily get more benefit. You probably just prolong how long melatonin is in your system and risk more side effects. Second, timing. This is where things get really interesting. The earlier people took melatonin before their planned sleep time, the better it worked. Within the range those trials had actually tested, which was up to about 3 to 3.5 hours before bed. In other words, the common habit of taking a low dose of melatonin half an hour before bed sits down near the barely doing anything part of the curve. In their models, moving to around 4 milligrams taken about 3 hours before your intended bedtime shifted you onto a much steeper, more effective part of the curve. There was another twist. When they looked at who responded, healthy sleepers actually improved more than people with diagnosed insomnia. That is, if your sleep system is basically intact but occasionally mistimed, melatonin can meaningfully nudge the timing and make falling asleep easier. But if you have full-blown chronic insomnia, where arousal, worry, and conditioned wakefulness are the core problems, melatonin is less impressive. That fits perfectly with the idea of melatonin as a timing tool rather than a rescue drug. So if we zoom out, yes, we probably have been taking melatonin in a suboptimal way, too little and too late. Taking it earlier rather than stronger appears to matter. But even when you optimize dose and timing, the effects in chronic insomnia remain modest. That's why behavioral treatments like CBTI are still the heavy hitters, and why melatonin is best thought of as an adjunct in insomnia rather than the hero of the story. Where melatonin really shines is when the problem isn't how you sleep, but when your body wants to sleep. These are the circadian rhythm sleep-wake disorders. Take delayed sleep-wake phase disorder, or DSWPD. Here, your internal night is shifted later than society expects. You can't fall asleep until very late, you struggle to wake up early, but once you are asleep, the architecture of your sleep can be perfectly normal. Your internal train still runs. It just pulls into the station at 2 a.m. instead of 10 p.m. For these disorders, clinical guidelines actually do recommend melatonin used strategically as part of treatment. The trick is timing. Research shows that small doses of melatonin taken several hours before your natural melatonin rise in the evening can shift your internal clock earlier. In practice, that often looks like 0.5 to 3 milligrams, taken roughly 4 to 5 hours before your desired bedtime, not at bedtime, combined with bright light exposure on waking. You're not using melatonin as a sledgehammer, you're using it as a watchmaker's screwdriver, advancing the hands of the clock minute by minute. Jet lag is essentially a circadian disorder we choose. We put ourselves in a tin can, fling it across 6 or 8 time zones, and then expect our brain's 24-hour clock to simply shrug and adapt. Here, melatonin is one of the few tools with decent evidence behind it. Trials involving flights across multiple time zones show that taking melatonin close to local bedtime at your destination, usually sometime between 10 p.m. and midnight, reduces the severity of jet lag, especially when you travel eastward. Doses between about 0.5 milligram and 5 milligrams appear similarly effective. Higher isn't clearly better. When used this way, for just a few days before and after travel, melatonin is short-term, targeted, and in otherwise healthy adults appears safe. If insomnia is the problem of not being able to sleep, jet lag is the problem of your sleep being scheduled in the wrong time zone. For that problem, melatonin, timed to local night, is one of the few levers that reliably nudges the clock toward the new time. Shift work is like permanent jet lag without the frequent flyer miles. Night shift nurses, factory workers, emergency personnel, they are constantly sleeping against their internal clock. Guidelines for circadian rhythm, sleep-wake disorders, suggest that melatonin can help here too, but in a very specific way. Taken before daytime sleep after a night shift, melatonin can improve how long and how well shift workers sleep during the day. It may also help shift the clock a little when used alongside strict control of light exposure. But melatonin does not reliably fix the problem of staying alert at 3 in the morning while you're drawing blood or driving a truck. It improves the recovery sleep. It does not erase the biological cost of working against your clock. Melatonin for shift workers is like a thick curtain you can pull across the window of daytime to make it look more like night. It doesn't move the sun, but it can create a better illusion of darkness in which to sleep. That's the efficacy side of the story. What about safety? Short term. In adults, the track record is reassuring. Compared with many prescription sleeping pills, melatonin's side effect profile is mild. Some people experience morning grogginess, headaches, or vivid dreams, but serious adverse events in trials have been rare. In children and adolescents, the picture is more delicate. Many of the pediatric trials involve kids with neurodevelopmental or psychiatric conditions where sleep problems are particularly severe. Reviews of these studies find that melatonin is not associated with serious adverse events like hospitalization or death. However, it does increase non-serious side effects, things like fatigue, daytime sleepiness, and mood changes. The real question in kids isn't, does it knock them out tonight? But what happens if we give this night after night for years during critical periods of growth? Long-term data are limited. Some work suggests there could be effects on puberty or bone health, with one study hinting at delayed puberty after many years of continuous use. That finding is not definitive, but it's enough to keep clinicians cautious. The sensible stance in children and teens is melatonin can be helpful, possibly, but long-term nightly use should be a deliberate decision, regularly revisited with a clinician, not something that drifts on autopilot. A partner of today's podcast is Pique, spelled Pique. Their sun goddess matcha represents ceremonial grade organic tea at its finest. The L-theanine content is particularly interesting as it promotes calm alertness, quite different from coffee's mechanism. This provides cognitive enhancement without the scattered energy I often observe in excessive coffee consumption. The biochemistry, powerful antioxidants that firm and brighten skin, combined with a natural balance of caffeine and calming compounds. This creates focused, sustained energy rather than the typical stimulant spike and crash. It also supports metabolic function, making it useful for fueling workouts and maintaining an active lifestyle. The sourcing matters here. 100% organic, grown in a pristine valley for maximum purity. My approach, late morning, around 10:30, particularly when I need to focus on data analysis or writing. I transfer it to my thermos for teaching sessions. The whisking ritual takes about 90 seconds. I'm rather fond of these small ceremonies. The focus is different from coffee, more sustained, less scattered, perfect for long department meetings. The taste is earthy and becomes wonderfully addicting, wonderfully quickly, I have to say. You can get 20% off for life, plus a complimentary gift at peaklife.com/mattwalker. Finally, let's talk about the heart. Recently, a very large observational analysis, more than 130,000 adults with chronic insomnia started making headlines. The question the researchers asked was, among these patients, is long-term melatonin use associated with a different rate of heart failure over 5 years compared with those who don't use melatonin long-term? The answer, at first glance, sounds alarming. Long-term melatonin users had about a 90% higher relative risk of being diagnosed with heart failure over that 5-year period. That's where the headlines come from. But if you zoom out to absolute risk, the picture looks less dramatic. In the non-melatonin group, 2.7% developed heart failure over 5 years. In the long-term melatonin group, it was 4.6%. That's a difference of just under 2 extra people out of every 100 over 5 years. The study was retrospective and observational. That means it looks backward in time at existing records. It does not randomize people to melatonin or no melatonin, and it cannot fully control for why someone was put on melatonin in the first place. The sickest sleepers, the ones with the worst insomnia, the most psychiatric comorbidity, the highest cardiovascular risk, may well be the ones who end up on long-term melatonin. That's called confounding by indication. The very reason you're given the drug is tangled up with the risk you're measuring. Even the team presenting the findings has been careful to say this is a signal that deserves further study, not proof that melatonin causes heart failure. The absolute risk increase is small. The design cannot prove causation. The findings have been presented at a scientific meeting and will need full peer-reviewed publication and replication before anyone rewrites the rulebook. So what should you do with that? If you are taking melatonin occasionally for jet lag or for a short spell while adjusting your schedule, this kind of finding is not a reason to panic. If you are taking melatonin every single night for months or years, especially if you also have cardiovascular risk factors, it is a good reason to sit down with your doctor and ask, is this still necessary? Is it doing enough for me? Are there better proven options for my sleep problem? Let me bring this all together into a few clear messages you can carry with you. First, melatonin is fundamentally a timing drug, not a sleeping pill. Its natural job is to announce biological night and help align your internal clock with the outside world. It works best when the problem is timing, your internal night is out of sync, rather than when the problem is anxiety hyperarousal or deeply conditioned insomnia. Second, for adult insomnia, melatonin offers modest benefits. Optimizing dose and timing around 4 milligrams taken about 3 hours before bed appears to squeeze more juice from the fruit, particularly in healthy sleepers, but even then, the gains are measured in minutes, not miracles. Behavioral treatments like CBTI remain the first choice intervention if you have chronic insomnia. Third, in circadian rhythm disorders, jet lag, and shift work, melatonin is one of the few evidence-backed tools that can meaningfully shift the phase of your internal clock. Here, low to moderate doses, carefully timed, often hours before sleep in circadian disorders, at local bedtime in jet lag, before daytime sleep in shift workers, can make a noticeable difference. Fourth, safety in the short term looks good for adults and reasonably reassuring, though not perfect, for children and adolescents under medical guidance. The unknowns accumulate when we look at long-term nightly use, especially in the young and in people with complex medical profiles. The heart failure signal is a small but important question mark, not a flashing red danger sign. If you remember one line from this episode, make it this: melatonin doesn't reliably generate sleep. If it did, and did so consistently across individuals, it would be the most commonly prescribed medication for insomnia, and yet it isn't. That fact alone tells you so much about how and why melatonin isn't helpful for the de novo generation of sleep, nor should you be reaching for it if you suffer from primary insomnia. Instead, melatonin tells your brain when night has arrived. Use it like a clockmaker, not like a bouncer brute forcing your exit from wakefulness. Aim for the right time, several hours before sleep onset. Not just a bigger dose, preferably 3 milligrams or less if you're trying to help anchor your 24-hour rhythm. And whenever possible, build your sleep on behavioral and cognitive foundations that we know are some of the most reliable ways to perfect your sleep and optimize it. Light exposure in the morning and light closure at night, regularity of bed, and especially wake-up time, keeping a cool temperature at night, and only associating your bed with sleep and sex. Thanks for tuning in. Please reach out on social media to let me know what other topics you want me to go deep on in terms of the real science. Sleep well, and bye for now.